What if I told you that the biggest financial takeover in human history is happening right now, in slow motion, right in front of your eyes, and almost no one on the news is willing to explain it to you? There's a country running a silent 80-year-old playbook against the United States, and if it succeeds, the dollar sitting in your wallet, your bank account, and your retirement fund will never mean the same thing again. Before I go any further, do me one small favor. If you want the full picture that mainstream media keeps hiding behind flashy headlines, smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with one friend who still believes the dollar will rule forever. Just one share. That is how truth spreads faster than propaganda in a world drowning in noise. Now let me take you back to the summer of 1944. World War II was still burning across Europe and the Pacific. Soldiers were still dying in muddy trenches. Cities were still being flattened by bombs. Families were still receiving telegrams that changed their lives forever. But inside a quiet hotel in a small town called Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, something far more important than any single battle was being decided. Representatives from 44 different countries showed up in tailored suits, not military uniforms. They were not there to argue about troops or tanks or territory. They were there to argue about money, specifically whose money would rule the world once the guns finally went silent. And here is the shocking part that most history books gloss over in a single paragraph. The meeting was over before it even began. America walked into that room holding cards no other country could match. Around 70% of all the monetary gold on Earth was sitting quietly inside American vaults. American factories were producing more steel, more ships, more planes, more weapons, and more everyday goods than the rest of the planet combined. Every other major power was on its knees. Britain was broke. France was in ruins. Germany and Japan were flattened into rubble. The Soviet Union had buried 27 million of its own people. America was the last giant still standing tall, and the numbers left absolutely no room for debate. So when the dust settled at Bretton Woods, the dollar was quietly crowned king. Every other currency was tied to it. The dollar itself was tied to gold, and from that single moment on, the entire financial machinery of the planet was quietly wired through Washington. Central banks, oil deals, wheat contracts, insurance markets, international loans, everything eventually flowed through American systems. That was the beginning of what historians now call the American century. And most Americans, then and now, had absolutely no idea it even happened. That was 80 years ago. And today, on the other side of the world, another country is running the exact same playbook, step by step, page by page, with a level of patience and long-term discipline that should honestly terrify every policymaker in Washington. That country is China. And by the time this video ends, you will see the strategy so clearly that you will never look at a news headline about the Yuan, gold, oil, or the dollar the same way again. To understand what China is doing today, you first have to understand how America stole the crown from Britain a century ago. Because before the dollar ruled the world, the British pound did. And the story of how one currency quietly replaced another is the exact same story being replayed right now, just with different actors on the stage. Rewind to the year 1900. London was the beating heart of global finance. If a merchant in India wanted to sell tea to a buyer in Argentina, the deal was probably paid in British pounds, cleared through a bank in London, and insured by a firm on Lloyd's Row. Even deals that had nothing to do with Britain still passed through British hands because British banks were the trusted middlemen of the entire world. That level of control gave Britain a superpower that most ordinary people never really understood. Economists call it seigniorage. In plain English, it means when everyone on Earth needs your currency, you get to quietly tax the entire planet just by printing paper. On top of that, it gave Britain massive political muscle. Try opposing British foreign policy when your entire economy depends on British banks for survival. You would not last a single week. American leaders watched all of this very carefully, and starting in the 1920s, they made a quiet, deliberate decision. They were not going to invade Britain. They were not going to fight Britain with warships or bombers. They were going to replace Britain one financial move at a time. And they did it in 5 clear, methodical steps that anyone can understand. Step 1, they became the world's biggest lender. During the First World War, America handed out massive loans to Britain and France to keep their war machines running. When the war ended, those countries were drowning in debt to Uncle Sam. And once you owe someone money, you no longer set the rules. The person holding your loan does. Step 2, America built up gold. Through the 1920s and 1930s, while other countries were struggling to feed their people, America was quietly hoarding the yellow metal. By the time Bretton Woods rolled around, 7 out of every 10 ounces of monetary gold on the planet were sitting locked inside American vaults. Gold was trust. Gold was proof. Gold was the ultimate scoreboard of who had really won the century. Whoever had the gold made the rules. It has been that way since before written history. Step 3, America built its own financial highways. Wall Street grew up as a direct rival to London, American banks opened offices in every major city on Earth, from Shanghai to Cairo to Buenos Aires. Slowly, quietly, they gave global traders an option that did not depend on the British system. And every trader who tried the American way and found it faster or cheaper never went back. Step 4. America simply waited. World War I had already weakened Britain badly. World War II broke its back completely. By 1944, Britain was not negotiating from strength. Britain was negotiating for survival. Britain needed American food, American oil, American ships, and American loans just to stay alive. And America was the one holding every single lifeline. Step 5. America walked into Bretton Woods and rewrote the rules of the game. Britain sent one of the smartest economists who ever lived, John Maynard Keynes, a man whose ideas still shape economics today. He begged for a neutral world currency called the Bancor, a currency that no single country would own or control, so that no one nation could ever dominate global finance again. He was outmaneuvered by American negotiators who had prepared for years. He lost. The dollar took the throne, and the world quietly bowed. Keynes went home a broken man and died 2 years later. Now here is where your stomach should tighten a little, because China is not inventing a new strategy. China is copying that exact 5-step plan, and they are already deep into it, further along than most Western analysts are willing to admit publicly. Take a breath here for a moment, because if this is opening your eyes, I genuinely need your help. Hit that like button right now. It sounds small, but it truly pushes this video in front of people who still believe the dollar is untouchable. And if you have not subscribed yet, tap that subscribe button. This channel connects the dots that most news anchors are too scared, too lazy, or too well paid off to ever connect. Every like, every subscribe, every share is a tiny act of quiet rebellion against the noise. Let us walk through China's version of the playbook, one step at a time, and you can decide for yourself how close they really are to pulling it off. Step 1 for China was becoming the world's lender, and they have been doing it patiently for more than 2 decades through something called the Belt and Road Initiative. Think of it as China handing out loans to countries all across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and even parts of Europe. Over $1 trillion of Chinese money has been poured into roads, railways, ports, bridges, dams, airports, and power plants in more than 140 nations. On the surface, it looks like generosity. Beneath the surface, it is leverage of the deepest kind. Because just like America's loans to Britain a century ago, these loans create dependence. If your country's biggest port was built with Chinese money, and Chinese state banks hold the mortgage on it, you think twice before voting against China at the United Nations. You think 3 times before letting American warships dock in that same port. Debt is a very quiet form of power, and China has become a master at using it. And here is the twist most people miss completely. China also owns roughly $800 billion in United States Treasury bonds. Western media loves to frame this as a threat to China. What if America stops paying? What if the dollar crashes? But flip the camera around for a second and look at it from Beijing. If China holds that much American debt, then, in a very real sense, China is one of America's biggest creditors. And creditors, as we already learned from Britain's story, are the ones who eventually set the terms. The person who lends the money is always more powerful than the person who spends it. Always. Step 2 for China is gold. And this is where things get quietly explosive. Since 2009, China has been buying gold like a country preparing for something enormous. Officially, the People's Bank of China reports over 2,000 tons of gold in its reserves. But many respected analysts believe the real number is far higher, possibly somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 tons, hidden across state-owned entities, military accounts, and sovereign wealth funds that never show up on public balance sheets. If those estimates are even close to true, China is positioning itself exactly the way America positioned itself in the years before Bretton Woods, not because they love shiny metal, but because they know exactly what gold represents at the negotiating table. Now you might ask, why does gold still matter in a world of digital payments, credit cards, and floating currencies? Here is the simple answer that every central banker knows but rarely says out loud. Gold is the one asset no government on earth can freeze. It cannot be sanctioned. It cannot be printed. It cannot be shut off with a keystroke from Washington or Brussels. It sits in a vault, silent, heavy, and outside the reach of any hostile power. When Russia was hit with sanctions in 2022 and around $300 billion of Russian foreign reserves were frozen overnight, every finance minister on earth got the message loud and clear. Dollars can be weaponized. Euros can be weaponized. Gold cannot. And from that moment forward, the global rush to accumulate gold accelerated at a pace not seen in decades. Guess who was leading that rush, month after month? China. Step 3 is the one that Western analysts constantly underestimate, and it might be the most important of all. China is quietly building its own version of the global financial system, brick by brick, protocol by protocol, wire by wire. There is a system called CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system. It is China's answer to SWIFT, the Western messaging network that connects almost every bank in the world. When America and its allies kicked Russian banks off SWIFT in 2022, it was a wake-up call heard from Brasilia to Riyadh to Jakarta. It proved that whoever controls the invisible pipes of global money can choke any country they choose at any moment. So China has been laying its own pipes, quietly, patiently, invisibly. Since 2015, CIPS has been growing. Today, over 1,300 financial institutions across more than 100 countries are connected to it. It is not yet a full replacement for SWIFT, but it does not need to be. It just needs to exist as a working escape hatch, and it does. Every country that connects to it is one less country that can be fully bullied by Washington. Then there's the yuan itself. China is quietly pushing more and more international trade to be settled in its own currency. And this is where a piece of news that should have shaken every news desk in America barely made the front page. Saudi Arabia, the largest oil exporter on the planet, started accepting Chinese yuan for oil sales to China in 2023. Read that sentence again slowly because it is that important. Oil, priced in dollars, has been the invisible foundation of American power since the 1970s, when a secret deal between Washington and Riyadh created what economists call the Petrodollar system. It is the reason the entire world needs dollars in the first place. Every drop of Saudi oil sold in yuan is a tiny crack in that foundation. And cracks, given enough time, become collapses. Russia now settles most of its trade with China in yuan and rubles. India is quietly experimenting with rupee-based trade deals with the UAE, Russia, and several African nations. Brazil has openly proposed a common BRICS currency to reduce dollar dependence in South America. The UAE, Argentina, Egypt, Iran, and Ethiopia have joined or aligned with the BRICS bloc. Each of these headlines looks small when you read it in isolation, buried on page 7 of a business paper. Zoom out, and you can see they are all pieces of the same enormous puzzle. A world quietly learning how to breathe without American oxygen. A world that is not shouting about it, not marching in the streets about it, but slowly, methodically, rewiring itself in the background. Step 4 for China is the easiest one of all because it does not require any action at all. China simply has to wait. America's national debt has already crossed $36 trillion, and it is growing at around 8% every single year. Interest payments alone are now over $1 trillion a year, more than the entire United States military budget. Let that sink in. America now spends more money on interest than on its Army, its Navy, its Air Force, its Space Force, and its intelligence agencies combined. And the political system in Washington, no matter which party is in charge, seems completely incapable of making the hard choices to fix it. Every election cycle promises reform. Every election cycle delivers more spending. America is not being defeated by an enemy. America is exhausting itself, just like Britain did between the 2 world wars. China does not have to win a single battle. China just has to outlast. Take a moment here because I want to say something honestly. Making these videos takes a lot of research, a lot of reading late at night, and a lot of long hours connecting dots that the mainstream refuses to touch because it makes their advertisers uncomfortable. If you have made it this far in the video, you're clearly not the average viewer. You actually want to understand the world instead of being spoon-fed slogans. So here's my simple ask. Do not just watch. Comment one word below, either dollar if you think America will keep the crown, or yuan if you think China is going to take it. That one word tells the algorithm this video matters, and it helps more people wake up to what is truly happening behind the curtain. That is all I'm asking. One word, one comment. One tiny action that costs you nothing but means everything to this channel. Now, back to the enormous question sitting at the center of all this. Is China actually close to knocking the dollar off its throne? The honest answer, without any hype and without any fear-mongering, is not yet. But much closer than most Americans realize, and moving faster than the official numbers suggest. Right now, the dollar makes up about 59% of global foreign exchange reserves. That sounds strong and unshakable until you compare it to where it was in 2001, which was around 71%. That is a drop of 12 percentage points in just 20 years. 12 points might sound small if you are not paying attention. But for a global reserve currency, it is enormous. The yuan is still small on that chart, only around 2%. But focusing only on the current number is a trap. The direction of the trend is what actually matters in geopolitics. If the dollar keeps losing share at this pace, in another 2 decades it could easily be under 50%. Still large, but no longer untouchable, no longer unquestioned, no longer the automatic default for every transaction on Earth. And notice what is happening at the edges of the global economy. New trade deals, new bilateral agreements, new energy contracts. especially across the global south, are increasingly being written in something other than dollars. Countries that used to accept dollar dominance as a fact of life are now openly discussing alternatives at diplomatic summits. The infrastructure to bypass the dollar already exists. It is growing every single year. It is being tested, refined, and expanded. This does not knock the dollar out overnight. It just quietly eats away at the ground under its feet, which, if you remember, is exactly how Britain lost the throne. Not in one dramatic collapse, not in a single day of panic, but in 3 decades of slow erosion that felt completely manageable, until suddenly, one afternoon in New Hampshire, it wasn't. To be fair, and this matters, America still has real strengths that China cannot easily copy. The rule of law, independent courts, transparent markets that publish real numbers, deep and liquid capital systems that investors around the world genuinely trust, a network of allies whose economies are wired directly into the dollar, freedom of press, freedom of speech, universities that attract the best minds on Earth. These are not small things. They will slow any financial transition significantly. If the dollar ever loses its crown, it will not happen in a year. It will probably take decades, and there is still time to fix things if the political will exists. But here's the lesson from Bretton Woods that almost nobody in Washington wants to face, honestly. Britain walked into that meeting in 1944, still technically holding the world's reserve currency. Britain walked out, having lost it forever. The final transition did not stretch out gradually over another 30 years. It crystallized in a single moment of maximum weakness. 3 decades of slow decline suddenly became one new global order overnight. That is how empires actually change hands. Not with a war, not with an invasion, with a signature on a piece of paper in a quiet conference room while most of the world is looking somewhere else. Before we go deeper into what comes next, a quick pause. If you're still watching, you are officially in the top 5% of curious minds on the internet right now. Most people scrolled away 4 minutes ago to watch someone dance on TikTok. You didn't. So do me this one favor. Screenshot this moment in the video, share it on any social media you use, tag it with the title, and let one more person on your feed learn what is really happening. Knowledge that stays trapped in one head changes nothing. Knowledge that spreads changes everything. Now let us keep going. China is not sitting around waiting for that Bretton Woods moment to happen by accident. China is deliberately building the exact conditions that create such a moment. The gold, accumulation. The Belt and Road lending, the alternative payment systems like CIPS, the oil deals settled in Yuan, the BRICS expansion conversations, the digital Yuan experiments that could someday leapfrog Western banking entirely. It is all preparation, meticulous, patient, decades-long preparation, so that when America finally faces its own moment of financial exhaustion, when the debt spiral forces a serious crisis, when interest payments crush the federal budget, when the credibility of the dollar finally comes into public question, China will be standing there with a plan, a system, and a currency ready to step forward and offer the world a new arrangement. Just like America stood ready in 1944 with its gold, its factories, and its dollars. The uncomfortable truth is this. China's intentions are no longer hidden. They stopped being hidden a long time ago. You cannot look at Belt and Road, at massive strategic gold buying, at CIPS, at oil deals in Yuan, and at coordinated BRICS diplomacy, and honestly pretend these are random, unconnected events. They are chapters of the same book, written by the same author, aimed at the same conclusion. The only real question left is whether America has the courage and the wisdom to respond in time, to bring down the debt, to rebuild real factories and real industry instead of just moving paper on Wall Street, to repair its alliances instead of insulting them on Twitter, to protect the credibility of the assets that trillions of dollars around the world still trust with their savings, their pensions, and their futures. Based on where things stand today, that response is not happening at anywhere near the speed required. Debt keeps rising faster than growth. Deficits keep growing even during peacetime. Political fights keep blocking every attempt at real reform. Bridges are crumbling. Trains are slower today than they were in the 1970s. American manufacturing has been hollowed out. Both political parties blame each other while the numbers get worse every year. America is behaving the exact way Britain behaved in the 1930s, hoping the old rules will hold, hoping the storm will pass, hoping the numbers will somehow magically fix themselves through sheer optimism. Britain hoped for the exact same thing. Numbers do not care about hope. Numbers only care about math. And the math is currently pointing in one direction. That is the part that should keep every serious person awake at night. Not because China is invincible. It absolutely is not. China's economy has deep, real problems of its own. A shaky property sector where entire ghost cities sit empty. A shrinking population that is aging faster than any major economy in history. Youth unemployment that has become so embarrassing, the government literally stopped publishing the numbers. rising tensions with neighbors, capital flight from wealthy citizens trying to move money out, massive local government debt. So China is not some flawless machine sweeping toward global dominance. It has cracks of its own, and those cracks could still swallow it before it ever reaches the finish line. But here is the brutal part. China does not need to be perfect. It only needs America to keep drifting. It only needs the West to keep sleeping. It only needs Washington to keep fighting itself while Beijing quietly plays chess with the rest of the world. Every month that passes without serious reform in America, another brick is added to the new financial world China is quietly building in the background. The story of Bretton Woods was never really about a hotel in New Hampshire. It was about a single moment when the world quietly agreed that global power had shifted. That kind of moment does not announce itself with fireworks or breaking news alerts. It usually shows up in a boring press release, a small headline near the bottom of a business page, a signed agreement between two finance ministers that most people scroll past on their phones without a second thought. And by the time everyone finally realizes what happened, the new order is already firmly locked in place. The old world is already gone. The new world is already here. So the next time you see a headline that Saudi Arabia is trading oil in Yuan, or that another country just joined BRICS, or that another central bank just quietly bought a fresh ton of gold, or that some obscure African nation just signed a Belt and Road deal, do not treat it as background noise. Do not scroll past it. Treat it as a page turning in a book that was first written in 1944, only this time America is playing the role of Britain, and China is playing the role that America once played with such brilliant, ruthless precision. Britain had brilliant minds too. Britain had Keynes himself, one of the sharpest economic thinkers in human history. He saw exactly what was coming decades before it arrived. He wrote about it. He warned about it. He fought against it in that quiet room in Bretton Woods with every ounce of intellect he possessed. And still, he lost. Not because he was wrong. He was completely right. But because the math had already turned against him years before he ever entered that room. That is the terrifying part of history that no one teaches in school. Being right is not enough. Being smart is not enough. Being early is not enough. If your economic foundations are already cracked and your leaders refuse to face reality, even genius cannot save you. The dollar in your pocket is not just paper. It is not just cotton and ink and a picture of a dead president. It is trust. It is the accumulated trust of billions of people who have never met each other, spread across every continent on Earth, silently agreeing without a single word that this piece of green paper actually means something real. Trust like that takes generations to build. It can be lost in a single decade of bad decisions, and the world is watching Washington very carefully right now to see which direction that trust is heading. So the real question, sitting quietly at the heart of this entire story, is not whether China is running America's 1944 playbook. That part is obvious now to anyone with open eyes. The real question is whether America still remembers how to be the country that wrote that playbook in the first place. A country that saved instead of borrowed. A country that invested in real things instead of speculating on paper. A country that built factories instead of tearing them down. A country that produced instead of just consumed. A country that led with quiet confidence instead of loud insecurity. Or whether America has quietly, without even noticing, become the country that just borrows, prints, argues, blames, and hopes. Because those two Americas cannot both exist at the same time. One of them is going to define the next century. And the one that wins is being chosen right now, not in some future election, but in the small daily decisions being made in boardrooms, in Congress, in universities, and in living rooms across the country. Because history has one very cruel habit. It does not repeat itself out of cruelty. It repeats itself because human beings keep making the same fundamental mistakes, generation after generation, believing every single time with total certainty that their empire will be the one that finally breaks the pattern, that their money is different, that their leaders are wiser, that their institutions are stronger, that the rules of gravity that pulled down every previous empire will politely make an exception this time. The Romans believed it too, right up until the barbarians walked through the gates. The Spanish believed it too, right up until their silver ran out. The Ottomans believed it too, right up until their currency collapsed under its own weight. The British believed it too, right up until the moment the math walked into a hotel in New Hampshire, sat down at the table, looked John Maynard Keynes politely in the eye, and quietly took the crown away. The only question now is whether America will listen to the whispers of history before the math walks into the next room. Because that room is being prepared right now. The chairs are being arranged, the paperwork is being drafted, the delegates are studying their notes, and unless something changes in Washington, and changes soon, the story of Bretton Woods is going to have a sequel. And this time, the empire on the losing side of the table will be speaking English.